Good evening, good peoples. It is Bruce with Targeted Wealth Creation. I wanted to get back to you all about silver. Something happened here. You guys know that I retired and made my fortune. Everybody's fortune is their own, determination on precious metals after the dot-com bust, which took a lot of wealth away in the decade of the 90s to 2000. So in that 2000s, I did a lot of discovery. In 2001, I started buying and investing in precious metals, mining, right? I own some physical, but not a lot. I learned my lesson though after the 2008 big 50% retracement, then went on to all-time new highs into 2011. So I have a lot more physical today. But I wanted to talk to you about why this has become important and what happened on August 25th. So on Monday, August 25th, earlier this week, the U.S. Department of Interior came out and added silver to the list of critical minerals. Okay. These being rare earths, copper, you've seen lithium. Just go look at a chart of copper, go look at a chart of lithium and see what it saying that it was a critical miner. Well, lithium was primary use was in electric vehicles. It has other uses, all batteries and so forth, right? And energy management, but the electric vehicle, and that was at the time that those were becoming, mandated, right? We backed off subsequently on that, but it is sort of a future technology for sure. And there are more than just cars. There's all kinds of other electric things, electric semis, forklifts, all kinds of things beyond just cars. So you can look at charts there and see what this implication is. So let me do a mini deep dive on silver and tell you why it's important to you. Okay. So first time ever we've added silver to the list. Well, to show you how important metals are, look at your fiat currency and then look at your fiat coins. You remember pre-65? A lot of you don't remember, right? But you see these people running around collecting dimes and quarters and half dollars and silver dollars pre-65 because they were 90%, give or take, of pure silver. Well, you can't afford to do that when you project out. But prior to that time, silver was in ample supply. It's in the Earth's crust. It's like gold, though. It takes a certain amount of labor, energy, etc., to extract it and process it. So prices for sure will rise on this, but let me give you all the things behind it of why it's already rising. So we want to treat as lithium, copper, and rare earths, right? Rare earth elements. I did a video on that. If you haven't seen that, watch rare earths and how that can be explosive. All you have to do is go out and look at stock symbol MP, right? That's something that the U.S. said, hey, we think they're a good producer of critical metals that we need. We're going to fund them. We're going to give them more money to mine and produce. Okay. And so that's what you start to see. That'll happen in silver. So, what is silver used for? Why is it even important? Why is it on the critical metals list? Well, silver is very high in electrical conductivity, second only to probably copper in that regard, and certain other rare earth metals. Okay, so silver is very important for electrical vehicles, semiconductors, healthcare, defense system, probably being the most critical of all. So you take these rare earth element things, these critical metals, add silver to it. I mean, you know what a Tomahawk missiles? I forget the amount, but we're always firing those off at people. Tomahawk missiles, right? They contain hundreds of ounces of silver in each missile. Boom, it explodes. Guess what? The silver is not recycled. There is a certain amount of recycling. I'll show you some charts on deficits and what recycling of silver brings in. So it's utilized, it's consumed, not like gold. Yeah, there's certain little key, pieces of gold in some things, but at 3,400 an ounce and soon probably 7,500 and 10,000, it's going to use less and less and less, and it's barely used now. It's just too expensive. So silver is an unindustrial metal, unlike gold. Okay. Gold's just too expensive. So with silver now on this list, the USA will stockpile silver the best they can. They will encourage investment and invest themselves and fast track regulations to allow more silver mining. Remember when we swing toward, the green side of things, everything's a no-no, right? Kind of like oil and natural gas. No, 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 not here, not my place. Well, I'll tell you how that swings real fast. Well, no, let's have, wind turbines. Let's have solar. Well, what happens in the winter when you get a terrible winter storm, AKA Europe, right? The wind turbines froze because there was wind, snowy, wet wind. They froze up, stopped working. No solar worked, right? So now you have a deficit. So what's the choice? People freeze to death. When it comes to death versus saying, oh, I might kill a fish or I might harm a bird or something, people flip and change. Now, I'm not saying the hell with, simple things. Like I love that the air is cleaner from all, they changed the regulations on automobiles and had catalytic converters and so forth. Guess what those utilize? Platinum and palladium, right? So when we were going EVs, everybody was saying, oh, we don't need platinum and palladium for that anymore. Well, we went back to hybrid and we flipped back, and that'll be a back and forth thing. There's other uses for those metals, but they're an industrial metal. Okay. So a big source, where does the US today with these big deficits get their silver? Well, we know not to try and get it from China. China doesn't have that much silver because China already cut us off on the REEs, right? The critical minerals, rare earth elements. Now, with some of the negotiations on tariff, they're like, okay, we're going to give you some. But the minute there's a conflict or a problem, they're going to cut us off again. So the US has realized we have to produce it ourselves. That's part of why there's this flip back to onshoring. You cannot be a power in the world and say, "Hey, we got this big military. Don't mess with us, or we'll fight you." Right? Walk softly but carry a big stick. I like that. I don't like wars. I wish we would never be involved in other countries' conflict. Right? There's nothing wrong with negotiating a peace, but let's not go over there and put our soldiers in harm's way for something that's over there. I know people say, "Well, yeah, but if you don't fight it over there, it comes here." Well, yeah, it came here big time when you open the borders and don't close them. Oh my God. That's just, some of the things that countries do, it's amazing. I'm in Southeast Asia. If I don't pay my, registration as a foreigner here and other kinds of things, they look at you like, you're out of here. You're blacklisted. You're not allowed in the country. So, now ICE is just trying to enforce the laws. But I don't want to get into politics here, guys, just saying some basic things. So, so we've put tariffs on Mexico, we put tariffs on Canada. They in turn have done things. I'll tell you what, if Mexico wants to mess with the US, most of the silver that we get or a lot of the silver we get comes from Mexico. Okay. Because Mexico is very rich in silver. There's tons of Canadian and American mining companies. I could go on from, big producers to developers and so forth that are operating in Mexico. And while at times there's some local people, native citizens or something up in the mountains and hills, and they want money and they're extremely poor, so they'll blockade or stop it, and then the cartel gets involved and don't let the working, the workers for the mine get to the mine. And there's been a few of those, and Mexican government tries to intervene and help. But what if, and then the second thing that happens in very leftist governments, I wouldn't put Mexico in that category, but when they get really leftist governments that come in, they'll just come in and take the mine and say, oh, I know you have a legal document that says you can mine for 20 years and you're paying us 8% to the government coffers for the right to do that. Well, we don't want to allow that anymore. Bye. And so then the company can't process it. It just gets taken over because they can make a lot more money trying to operate. A lot of times they don't have the expertise in people, right? But that's a whole separate topic. So I'm kind of looking at this and saying, Does Mexico ever get pissed off and just say, well, we're going to put 100% tariff on silver export? So the US is scrambling just knowing these kinds of things, okay? So we're already at a 3-year deficit of probably 5 years is more. It depends on who you read and what statistic you look at. I'm being conservative and saying there's a 3-year deficit of supply versus demand. So let's go take a look at that. So here's a key metric. You got mine production, right? 2025 projection, 834 million ounces. So how much has that changed since 2014? Well, it's minus 7.23. So we're producing less silver today than we produced in the past. So what's the market impact? Well, primarily a supply contraction, right? So what about recycled supply, right? And if that's the first thing that somebody who says, "Oh, the deficit won't last," we just increase the recycled supply. And clearly, if silver climbs from 38 spot now to 40 to 45 to 50, I remember it. I had a woman boss in IT, which in those days was rare in itself back in the late 70s. And he was working for a company called Computer Sciences Corporation. And I remember it was 1979. And she said, Bruce, have you seen the price of silver? And I'm like, no, should I? Oh, yeah. She said, I'm pulling out my grandmother's, my great aunt. She goes, this thing is going crazy. They say it's going to go to $50 to $100. I don't remember what it was at that point, right? Maybe it was only 25, and it did run. A Hunt brother ran to 49. And she said, I'm selling. I'm basically recycling and getting the cash, Before it was pretty, it had sentimental value, but now all of a sudden it's worth a lot of money, right? So I get that boom and bust cycles, eventually you get more. But today, even at the recycling, 34 is quite a bit higher than, do you know what it was in 2020 when COVID hit? It went down to like $4 to $6 for silver. We're at 38, okay? But guess what? Historically, in 1980, when the Hunt brothers took over, right? Now that's an anomaly. They drove it to $49 back then. That's like $102 inflation adjusted for now. Okay, so let's throw that one out and say, well, that's a crazy high number, even though it was real. What other asset or value something is priced less today than it was 1980? I can't think of anything. Because if you say computers and technology, they didn't really exist in those days, right? 79, you had mainframes. You didn't even have a PC at that point. So the PC started coming out in the mid 80s, right? And then Apple and so forth. So your recycling is producing 24.6. So it's a partial deficit offset. Okay. What about the market deficit? Well, 2025 projection is we're short 117.7 million ounces. So that's significant versus the past. Fifth consecutive deficit year. I was using 3. Total demand exceeds supply by 117 million ounces. Change increasing. So there's nothing yet that's increasing the supply. Price will drive people to be more aggressive. And then with the government marking it as critical metals, so we'll start to make up some of this. But my guess is based on all these things. Remember what silver, electric vehicles, healthcare, it's all over healthcare. Okay. It's all over wind farms, right? Technology. You can't have solar panels. Sorry, I said wind farm. You can't have solar panels without silver. Okay. So not only are we in a deficit, and warfare, all these new modern electronics and satellites use silver and copper. So you need silver even more. So if we don't get aggressive now, we're going to have a massive. All right, so let's get back to our list. Enough said on that. So the big upside, how do you make money on this? How can what things should you do? How do you capitalize? I'm telling you because I've been capitalizing on it for some period of time. I'm early. I'm usually always early. but I'll set and wait. I bought some miners that I'm just now getting even on, silver miners, back in 2020. But that's all right. I know where they're going, multitudes higher. I knew then in 20 when it kind of ran up and pulled back that I owned something that was valuable. Okay. So, but only by reputable companies, guys. Let me explain the difference. You've heard this probably, but let's show you this. There's a saying that anytime there's a promoter of gold or silver mines, you know, there's a liar on top of a hole in the ground. So here's my little pictorial to talk about that. So, how do you differentiate, right? A liar, or another name that gets used, there is a lifestyle CEO. You got some guy who's been in the mining business for 25 years and he's never done anything, right? He's been a CEO of, this is his eighth company. They change the name when it gets really hot, right? They make sure they have silver or the latest, greatest thing to say. And all they do is he gets three or four friends, they form a board, they go borrow some money, they got moose pasture, there's absolutely no mineralization. And they say, well, we're doing geophysical tests and surface imaging, and we plan to drill. It's just lie after lie after lie. So you invest in the money, the stock continues down, and then they say, hey, we need to do an equity raise, right? We need to go raise more money. Well, the hotter the market is, the easier it is to raise money. So new people come in and put, oh, a silver miner, are you kidding? Silver is critical metal. It's hot right now. So they go in and they invest in that company because he's a good BSer, right? And 75% of probably the junior silver miners fall. They may not be a pure liar, but they've never had a successful track record, or they got an average track record. Maybe the CEO isn't even a liar, but he's got lousy geologists. He doesn't have a very good finance guy. Even if they found something, they're not going to get financed, right? So they can't get the company going. But when you have these lifestyle guys that him and his buddies pay themselves, 500,000 a year, and they eat up your money and they refinance, right? And then you have Bre-X, right? The former. So you have to be careful. But at the same time, there's legitimate opportunities, right? Here's a fool gold, guaranteed riches, right? Don't walk, but run away when they say it's guaranteed. Because even some of the 40 baggers that I invest in, 100 baggers, there's risk. First off, I've qualified them from a checklist. So I know they're not liars. I know that management has a good track record. I know they have a CFO that's done financing before. So yada, yada, yada. I go through all of the things. And even then, they may not find enough, right? So you would call that lowest category a explorer. So I tend to stay away from explorers if I really want it. Although somebody who's exploring and they make a fantastic hit, that can be 100 bagger, literally. But I'll take a 40 bagger in a developer that's already on his land plot, found, measured, indicated, got a PEA. He's already said, I got, 50 million ounces in the ground. And my assessment is it's going to, my ASIC, my ability to extract it out of the ground and fully burden cost is, say, $20. Well, silver's selling at 38 spot. By the time he puts a mine into production, it's probably going to be $50, you know. And so I'm willing to take that risk if I check box all of those things. So it's really important, guys. I've been there, I've done it. I've chased this before I knew. I did some of this in the 2000s bull run. These bull runs repeat themselves. They become the dot-com bubble when it doesn't matter about eyeballs. It doesn't matter if the product's any good. They got a website. I'm going all in. And some of them rise another 50 or 100%, but they don't sustain it. They're not sustainable. So stick with my videos. If you're in my Patreon, I give you guys quality companies to buy. I'm not going to do it in this one. I'm just telling you why silver is going to go likely to $100 or more. Okay. So how can you benefit from it in addition to buying the miners? Okay. or what I call late stage developers. They've already identified the assets, they're drilling for more, so they're a takeout candidate. But the ones you don't want to get taken out because you probably get a 100% premium on your current price. I didn't buy it to get a 1x, I bought it to get a 20 to 40x, right? So it's frustrating. So you have to ask the CEO, what's the inside ownership? How much shares do the insiders own? Well, that's if you get 40, 50% insider ownership, that means they're locked hands, right? They're not going to sell out for, if somebody offers them 5x, 10x right now, they might take it, but they're not going to take, a 60% premium to value today. They know what they've got. All right. So you can also buy physical silver and hold it. So, how do you buy physical silver? Well, there's a lot of choices, right? You will pay a premium over spot for minted coins. What do I mean by minted coins? Well, around the world, before I get into junk silver, let me show you an image. So here's an example of these happen to be 2021, but they're going to look the same in 2025. Every year they make silver eagles. Well, silver eagle is what the US government meant, right? These are limited supply, guys. They only have so much to make the coins on. And then you can buy them from I don't think you can buy it directly from the government like you can in the Royal Mint in Canada, but they have authorized resellers, what you'd term wholesalers. That's where I bought my multiple monster boxes. I'll talk about what a monster box is in a minute. So this is front and back of these coins, and they may have I know the gold coin, the 1 ounce gold has a value of $20. I think these have a value of $5. Well, there in no way would you ever want to use it as the coin value of $5, right? It's spot price plus what you pay, which is probably right now $2 or $3. When silver goes nuts, these coins will reflect spot. Say spot's 80, you might have a 12% premium on top of that. And what is that premium? Well, the premium allows a dealer to make money because it costs something. These aren't just melted silver, but they're always worth the melted silver value, right? So you can barter with these if everything goes to hell, right? A lot more than you can on a gold coin. You got a 1 ounce gold coin, it's worth 3,400, and you want to buy something for $500. I don't have change, right? So just be aware of that. All right, let's go back here. You can buy what is called junk coins. You've heard this term. Most in US know it. And this is true around the world. If you're in the UK, you're in Australia, they did different amounts of coinage also. I'm just not that familiar with them. I know the names of their gold and silver coins, okay? And so if you want to buy a silver eagle, you can do that, right? If you want to buy a Canadian maple leaf, either a 1 ounce gold or a 1 ounce silver. And then in gold, they usually do half ounces. And, every country and every situation is different. Okay. So, for instance, when I talked about the monster box, each coin or each monster box, they're a big green hard plastic box, and inside it holds and chips with 500 1 ounce silver coins. Well, when I bought mine, it were a lot. They weren't in the 30s, right? So I've got a lot of profit in that. But I was early to the game, right? And I wouldn't even consider selling. I'd probably sell a portion, maybe 20% of them, if I saw $100 silver. But other than that, there's no way I would sell any of my silver. So so that's a monster box. Junk silver. Junk silver is all those pre 1965 coins. You buy a big bag of them, and they come in different, weights of the bag. Those are easily sold. You can go to your local coin dealer. I mean, you can go to your local coin dealer and buy an eagle or buy a Canadian maple leaf or something like that. But I prefer just to buy from the wholesalers personally. But people build relationships with local gold and silver shops. Okay. So silver mining companies, I mentioned, I started telling you don't buy the wrong one and all that. Okay, the liar, the hole in the ground. But we're talking, I can think of at least 15, maybe 20 silver miners that I see as 10 baggers. just up to a run of $50 silver. When you start talking about $100 silver, $150 silver, which I think is a reasonable target, it's easy to see that some can be 40 to 100 baggers. Guys, these are opportunities of a lifetime in some ways. Now, what else? What if you don't know how to pick the miners and you want to buy an ETF? Well, you're getting the average, right? You're getting a whole bunch of companies, but instead of getting the one you picked that blew up, 10 times, maybe you only went up 4.5 on the ETF. But then again, you may pick three, what you think are 10 baggers, and none of them end up being that. Maybe they only just go 1.5 times. So in that case, you were better in the ETF. So it's a mix and match. So what are some silver ETFs? Just off the cuff, SIL and SILJ. Okay. Well, the same company, I think, is Amplify, that puts out SILJ, also now has a brand new fund that's 4 or 5 days trading. I did a video on that. Sorry, guys. I had to cough. So, and it's called SLJY from Amplify. It buys underneath SILJ, then it also goes and buys some of the better mid-tier, high-tier silver miners, right? And writes options on those and writes options on SILJ. So it's kind of a dual thing, but it doesn't write all of its money worth of options. So it leaves some for growth, because if you produce too much income, your NAV has a hard time moving up. It declines. So they're targeting an 18% annual income, and then they're going to pay you monthly. So I highly recommend this product. I mean, I think this will be a real winner, especially with Amplify having that 11 years of having SILJ already out there. Okay. But keep in mind that it likely will underperform SILJ itself. But if you need income and you like the metals and the miners and you like silver, which you should if you like them, right? Silver percentage wise is going to move up a lot more than gold. Is it way more volatile? Absolutely. For instance, if silver breaks out and runs to $75, I could easily see it going right back to $50, right? And then if you're chasing it, you first started buying at 60, then 70, and then you go all in with everything at 75, and it goes back to 50. You're like, huh, huh. You got to understand the volatility. But right now, could silver go back to maybe 30? That would be about it. I can't imagine. With this critical mineral, I think there's little to no chance of that. But anything can happen. That would come from just a pure liquidity thing. The markets crashed 30%. Everything was sold. Margin calls were all over the place. People would sell them. Remember, a stock is a stock. That I learned at the very end of the last bull run going into 2008 through 2011. It's not uncommon for a pullback. Let me give you the 2008 scenario. Okay, so you had a bull run going on in metals and miners. And what do I mean by bull run? They outperformed everything else. If you owned a gold or silver ETF, you outpaced the Nasdaq, you outpaced the SPY, you outpaced basically everything because it was a commodity super cycle. Oil and precious metals roared during that decade, okay? And people don't look at that and understand that enough. Now, it's not always the case. I'd say there's a higher amount of years that the S&P does better. But when you get a decade, and we're in that commodity super cycle now, so I'm just sort of waiting. I already own everything in position. I'm waiting for when these top 10 NASDAQ companies, Mag 7 Plus, almost every one of them has a market cap that exceeds all gold and silver mining companies in the world. Add up their market cap, and you do not get the market cap of a single NVIDIA, Meta, Google. It could go on and on. So when you're that far out of kilter, things revert to the mean. So this next number of years, precious metals miners and commodities will outperform. Okay. If it was 3 months and it was a sector and it was going to rise up and then go away, I wouldn't suggest something different. You need to be in this sector. You need to own some in this sector. And then what happens when it rises? You know what you're going to say? Boy, I wish I'd have bought more. We all do that. I've had miners where I spread my money out across 10 little juniors and I put in $1,500. This was back in that last decade. And, a couple of them went up 8x. I'm like, dang, I should have put more in. Well, I spread it across because I had other ones that only went up 10 or 12% or 15%, because they were lifestylers or something like that. I didn't really hone my checklist capability like I have now. All right. So SLJY, if you want the income along the way, you will not do as well in the growth side, but I understand the trade off. So here's the thing I was saying about you'll know we're only in the third inning of this commodity super cycle, probably the top of the third. Silver is a very small sector. Gold is a small sector, but at least gold just about equates to a higher percentage, way higher than silver does. Okay. So silver is so flow out of just tech stocks, just a tiny, tiny bit of the money can skyrocket the price of silver. And it's exactly what happens. Think of this. People are frustrated with their tech. It's clear that this high flying is over for a while. Now, there will be some in the energy sector, things like Palantir to me just have such a great technology that it may get knocked down if the markets go down 30%, but I still see it performing. So there's always exceptions. Bitcoin and the Bitcoin miners, right? Still kind of bullish on that cycle, but just big tech for the instance of being big tech, it's got to slow down. It's way overvalued. But there are certain segments in the AI and some of the stuff that'll do well. So how do you stay abreast of that and how do you figure out your investments? Well, you start over in the precious metals and the commodity side. Commodity side being energy, uranium. Do you own uranium? I got another video coming out on that. Another hot sector around energy. Okay. So these miners are greatly leveraged to the price of silver. Let me give you an example. Okay. Look at this. So I took a silver miner. I don't yet. I was going to plug in the PEs and all that, but it ended up being a very long exercise. So I made it simpler. Let's say this is the final piece, guys. So spot silver is at 38. Let's say that your mining company, XYZ, has an all-in sustaining cost. That's a measure that every company puts out. You can't be a public company and report your earnings without saying what your ASIC is. Doesn't matter if it's copper, it doesn't matter if it's gold, it doesn't matter if it's silver. So now at 24 and a half and spots 38, that last quarter you very likely were selling somewhere between 35 and 38. I'm just saying you got a profit of 13 and a half per ounce. Well, what did you produce? Mid-size company can easily produce 4 million ounces annually of silver. So what's an annual profit? Well, it's 54 million, but after you look, and then what kind of gain is that? This is using a real company, okay? I'm not giving the company away. So its profit gain is 50% over last year, okay? So it's got 488 million shares outstanding. So what happens when silver just goes up less than 10% to $40, right? So I even raised the ASIC. A lot of these companies, it doesn't, right? It's energy. Oil's now if oil spiked to $100, yeah, we'd probably have to raise ASIC by a couple of dollars. But a lot of these companies are lowering their ASIC because they have lower energy costs. So it's labor, people, equipment, and that. So if interest rates go down and they need to acquire new capital equipment, then they get a better deal on it, just like you would on a house or a car, right? Although sometimes the 10-year is stubborn on the mortgage side, they can lower short-term rates. But short-term rates are better when you're purchasing this kind of equipment in a car because you typically are only 2, 3, 5-year loans on cars. Not like a mortgage is 30 years. All right. So they're increasing their production. Look at this, guys. And in this case, I just took a year and said, hey, people are going to flock into the stock because the stock price is going up, right? But look at this. So at 40, then when we go to 45, right, I've increased these. But look at the profit now. Instead of 13.5, it's 18.5. That's another 50%, okay? Almost 50% increase. So it's 174%, 275%. You know, at $50 silver, these companies are printing money. The free cash flow is out of the roof. These things could be many multiples. At $50 silver, even a big cap silver, a Coeur d'Alene, a Hecla, right? Or it's not Coeur d'Alene anymore, it's Coeur Mining. But that it used to have that name. It shows you I'm dating myself. But $50 silver, these things will just blow up. So will the stock price, guys. I won't have to tell you that we're in a silver bull market. You'll know if you own a single silver share of something, you're going to see it, okay? And you get the better lower cost miners, right? Who have even more leverage. So if you've got a small, you know, a large developer that's just about ready to start its mine and they've identified all this silver and the grade is super high and they say, hey, my ASIC is likely to be $19 and I've got identified, you know, 50 million ounces of silver. Oh my gosh, you do all the other check boxes, management, right? The ability to get financing, the plan to go to production, et cetera, et cetera. You check all those boxes, you've got a miner that will just go crazy on the stock price. So that's something. Now, somebody will say to me inevitably, well, Bruce, would you rather own physical or would you rather own the stock? At this point of where we are in the market, I'd rather own the stock. But would I sleep well when that stock doubles, triples, quadruples, goes up 5 times, and I think it can go to 15? And I'm waiting, and let's say it gets to 9 and we get a 50% pullback in the market. Just a bloodbath, everything. They throw the baby out with the bathwater. Then I'm going shoulda, coulda, woulda, right? So I learned my lesson there. I trim profits along the way so that as soon as it triples, I've already taken out my initial investment, maybe 4 times. So as it runs, I'm still losing when it goes to a 9x and pulls back to a 5x, but it's not my money anymore. It's my gained money, but I've already gotten my investment back. What physical does, it has no counterparty risk. Nobody can take your physical if you own it. If you have it in a safe deposit box and there's a bank run or they pass some law or they just come in and take it or somebody breaks into the bank and gets into the safe deposit box, I no longer play that game. Okay. I had a close call. I was actually in a private vault company. Okay. I was outside the US during the time. That private vault company, when I came back, I wanted to go visit. I had a voicemail and it said, sorry, we were robbed and maybe a third of all of our assets were taken. We're not sure whose is what because it's a private place. They don't even know my name, they just know my email address. Okay. So they had sent me, sorry, they sent me a message, they didn't call. And I went in, and luckily, the state had assigned a prosecutor to handle it. He inventoried all the assets and made a note. This is how many of these coins, this many coins, this, that. And then you had to call in and say, this is what I had in my box. This is who I am. They didn't even have a name. They had a box number, you know, and a name. That's why I liked it. It was, you know, anonymous, but and luckily mine wasn't taken. They went in after the super safes, right? They went into the, you know, thousands and thousands, right? I had 2 monster boxes in there and a whole bunch of gold coin, but I didn't have the biggest. And so from a time standpoint, they took the biggest room, not the smaller safe deposit box rooms. And I was able to get that money back and go meet with that individual, court reported individual, and I gave him, several $100 as a thank you for just his time to come out and meet with me and have my assets there. Of course, I had to show IDs and all of that kind of stuff. But it can happen, guys, even a legitimate fault, unless you go with a Brinks or a big giant company. But even then, your costs get very high from these companies, right? Because they have the latest tech. All right, I'm going to let you go. I've been long in the tooth on this, but this is valuable information. I know you guys appreciate it. I know I'll probably get a ton of questions when I put this out on Patreon. I may or may not. The general public still isn't really aware of this. My views are much smaller on these than they are on my income ETFs and all of that kind of stuff. But smart people, okay, this critical message, this critical category for silver ought to do a wake up, let alone this monetizing the assets on the balance sheet that Scott Bessent has been telling you guys without telling you, okay? Gold and silver are going to get brought into that along with land with critical minerals on them. All right, guys, this is Bruce with Targeted Wealth Creation. I will sign out here. I'm not a financial advisor. This is not financial advice. Bye for now.